Love has the power to lift us higher than we ever imagined and to leave us quietly unraveling. When we least expect it, it can feel like a warm light, and then just as suddenly, like a shadow. One moment, we feel deeply connected to someone. The next, we're met with silence. No argument, no explanation, just absence. In moments like this, it's easy to assume the worst. We think, they must have stopped caring. Maybe I did something wrong. But what if this distance isn't about rejection? What if it's about something deeper? Something hidden within the human psyche? Carl Jung, the renowned Swiss psychologist, taught that the unconscious holds far more sway over us than we realize. When love touches us deeply, it doesn't only awaken joy, it stirs old fears, buried memories, and wounds we thought had healed. The person we love becomes a mirror, not just reflecting who we want to be, but who we're afraid we still are. For many, love feels like losing control. The more intense the bond, the more the unconscious defends itself, often through withdrawal, avoidance, or emotional silence. Not because the love is fake, but because the feeling is overwhelming. The instinct to flee isn't always a choice. It's a survival response from the deeper layers of the mind. So when someone pulls away, it might not be a statement about you at all. It could be their way of wrestling with the part of themselves that love has exposed. This is not an ending, it's an invitation. Not to chase them, but to turn inward and ask, what is this moment trying to show me about myself? Let's explore what really happens beneath the silence. 1. The distance that love creates. There's a quiet kind of pain that comes when someone we feel deeply connected to begins to pull away. No conflict, no closure, just a gradual fading, like watching a light dim without knowing why. It's a moment that leaves many confused, even heartbroken. In our culture, we're quick to interpret this as a loss of interest. We assume that when someone withdraws, it must mean they no longer care. But what if that silence isn't rejection? What if the distance is not a sign that love has ended, but that it has gone too deep, too fast, and stirred something unresolved? Carl Jung taught that our unconscious mind governs much of what we do, especially when emotions run high. We may believe we're acting from logic or conscious choice, but beneath the surface, another world is in motion. A world shaped by childhood wounds, fears of abandonment, and memories we've buried but never truly released. When love reaches a certain depth, it doesn't just bring joy. It becomes a mirror that reflects not only who we aspire to be, but also the parts of ourselves we'd rather not face. Love shows us our insecurities, our hidden fears, the tender places we've protected for so long. And sometimes, that mirror is too much to bear. This is when the unconscious activates a defense. Not out of cruelty, but out of fear. The distancing isn't meant to hurt, it's a shield, a way to protect the self from a perceived threat. The threat isn't the other person. It's the vulnerability that love demands. Some people withdraw not because they don't feel, but because they feel too much. They fear losing control. They fear becoming dependent. They fear being seen too clearly. So they run. They disappear. They shut down. And those left behind are often left wondering, what did I do wrong? But often it's not about doing anything wrong at all. It's about what love has awakened in the etheric confrontation with their own shadow. Instead of taking this personally, what if we saw it as an invitation? An invitation to pause and turn inward, to ask not just why they left, but what this silence is calling forth within me. What part of me still aches to be seen? What fear in me resonates with their withdrawal? Jung believed that the relationships we attract are mirrors of our inner world. And sometimes, distance is the soul's way of creating space for growth, both theirs and ours. So rather than holding on tightly, maybe the healing begins when we start listening, not just to the silence between us, but to the echoes it creates inside. But what if that silence isn't absence at all, but a mirror reflecting back everything we haven't yet seen in ourselves? To love as a mirror of the self. There are moments in love when we feel exposed, not in a physical sense, but emotionally, spiritually. The presence of another person begins to uncover layers we've kept hidden, even from ourselves. We feel seen, truly seen, and that can be just as frightening as it is beautiful. Many people mistake this fear as a sign that something is wrong. They wonder why their partner, who who once seemed open and loving, suddenly retreats or pulls back. The common belief is that love should feel easy, warm, and constantly reassuring. So when discomfort arises, we assume it means the love is fading. But discomfort is not the enemy. Sometimes, it's the sign that love has reached a deeper level. Carl Jung believed that love activates the unconscious part of us where our old wounds, suppressed fears, and unresolved emotions live. When someone loves us deeply, they don't just affirm our worth. They reflect back everything we've hidden. They become a mirror not only to our light, but to our shadow. And not everyone is ready to face that reflection. This is where many people unconsciously resist love. Not because they don't feel it, but because they fear what it reveals. Suddenly, past experiences resurface. Feelings of abandonment, rejection, or unworthiness rise without warning. And rather than confront these emotions, many retreat. They withdraw not from love itself, but from the parts of themselves they can't yet accept. This withdrawal is often misunderstood. The partner who stays might feel blamed, confused, or unlovable. But in many cases, the distancing has nothing to do with them. It's a silent, unconscious defense mechanism, a way to protect the self from emotional exposure. Jung taught that until we make the unconscious conscious, it will direct our lives and we will call it fate. In love, this means our reactions often come from old stories we haven't rewritten. We think we're responding to the present, but we're reliving the past. So when love begins to stir something uncomfortable inside you or in someone, we care about what if we paused instead of panicked. What if we saw the discomfort not as a warning sign, but as an opening? A sign that something deeper is asking to be healed? Love, at its most honest, is never just about the other person. It's a doorway into ourselves. The closeness we crave from another often mirrors the closeness we're afraid to give ourselves. Rather than rush to fix the distance, what if we used it as a chance to reflect? What does this mirror show me? What wounds still ask for my attention? In the silence, there is wisdom. And in every retreat, there is the possibility of return it just to the relationship, but to the truth of who we are. And sometimes, what we see in that mirror isn't just beauty, it's fear, vulnerability, and the parts of us still longing to heal. 3. The fear beneath emotional intimacy. Sometimes, love doesn't feel safe. Even when it's real, even when it's kind. There's a part of us that recoils from it because we don't want connection, but because it feels too vulnerable, too much, too close, too raw. It's a common misunderstanding to think that those who pull away lack love. In reality, some people withdraw precisely because they love deeply. Their distancing is not a sign of emotional coldness, but of inner conflict. And unless we understand the unconscious forces behind this, we may continue to blame ourselves, or blame them, for something far more complex. Carl Jung wrote that the unconscious holds not only forgotten memories, but also our fears, our shame, and our deeply rooted defense patterns. When love touches the soul, it often stirs all of these at once. Suddenly, the person we love becomes a trigger net because they've done anything wrong, but because they've seen too much. They've entered the space we've spent years guarding. Emotional intimacy is often romanticized, but in truth, it can feel threatening. To be known without masks is to be seen in our most fragile state, and not everyone is ready for that. The instinct to flee isn't always a conscious choice. It emerges from the deeper, hidden places in us that equate love with loss, closeness with danger. People who have experienced abandonment or betrayal may develop an unconscious belief that love cannot be trusted. Those who grew up needing to control their environment might associate intimacy with unpredictability and thus fear it. Even those who crave connection may sabotage it the moment it becomes too real. Why? Because love exposes the self, and the self, when wounded, doesn't always want to be seen. What looks like avoidance may actually be protection. What seems like emotional distance may be a wall built long ago, now triggered by something tender and honest. This is why many relationships fail, not because of a lack of love, but because of unspoken fear. But fear is not the end of the story, it's the beginning of healing. If we can pause long enough to recognize the pattern, to name the fear, and to stop making it about worthiness or blame, we open a door back to ourselves. What if we saw the fear of closeness not as a problem to fix, but as a signal? What if, instead of trying to chase or convince someone, we asked, what part of me is afraid to be loved this deeply, too? Because in every emotional withdrawal, there is a reflection, a mirror inviting us to soften, to look inward, to understand. Healing begins not in demanding answers from others, but in becoming honest with ourselves. And when we meet that honesty with compassion, we allow space for both love and fear to coexist without shame. When that fear becomes too overwhelming, it doesn't always look like fear, it often looks like distance, or silence that tests the bond without saying a word. For the space that reveals the truth, when someone we love begins to drift away, it often leaves us in confusion. No explanation, no visible conflict, just absence. A slow pulling back that feels more like a question than an answer. Many interpret this distance as the end. They assume love must have faded, that the silence means disinterest. But what if the truth is more complicated? What if the space is not a disappearance, but a reflection of fear? Carl Jung believed that relationships awaken the unconscious part of ourselves we don't fully see. And when love becomes too real, too intimate, it doesn't just bring comfort, it exposes us. It becomes a mirror, reflecting both our longing and our deepest wounds. For some, that mirror becomes unbearable, not because they don't love, but because they are not ready to be seen so clearly. The bond reveals old pain, reopens buried insecurities, and threatens the defenses they've built to survive. So they pull away not to hurt, but to protect what still feels fragile inside. In these moments, distance becomes a way to cope, a silent test, not always conscious, but deeply emotional. The unspoken question becomes, is this love strong enough to survive without constant closeness? But love that relies on tests is often rooted in fear. Fear of vulnerability, fear of losing oneself, fear of needing too much. This behavior isn't about manipulation. It's often a reflection of unresolved trauma and unconscious protection. A way to regain control when emotions feel too overwhelming to manage. And yet, we often respond by chasing, trying to fill the silence, trying to prove we're enough. But healing doesn't happen through provenge, it happens through understanding. Jung taught that what we avoid in ourselves appears in our relationships. So if someone distances themselves, it may be their own fear you're witnessing at your failure. And if that fear triggers something inside you, perhaps that's where your attention is needed. Instead of asking, why are they pulling away? Ask, what is this distance awakening in me? What fear is being mirrored back to my own heart? What part of me still clings to closeness as a measure of worth? Not every absence is abandonment. Sometimes, space is where truth reveals itself. Sometimes, stepping back isn't about leaving, it's about breathing, about facing emotions that have long gone untouched. If we stop trying to fix the other person and instead listen to what our own soul is trying to say, we begin to heal. The real test is not whether they come back. The real test is whether we return to ourselves with more awareness, more compassion, and the strength to love without losing who we are. And while it may feel like rejection, it often invites us to pause and ask what this distance is really awakening within us. 5. Returning to the self. When someone pulls away from us, our first instinct is often to reach, to hold on tighter, to fill the silence with answers, with presence, with effort. But sometimes, the more we try to hold on, the more we lose ourselves in the process. We've been conditioned to believe that love must always be nurtured, protected, even chased. That if someone is slipping away, it's our responsibility to make them stay. But what if letting go is not giving up but honoring the space that love needs to breathe? Carl Jung taught that when we seek others, we are often seeking parts of ourselves. And when someone distances themselves, it may not be a rejection, but a reflection. A mirror showing us where we are still clinging, still afraid, still searching for validation outside of our own heart. The unconscious doesn't always speak in words. It speaks through reactions, patterns, and emotional responses that seem to make no sense until we look deeper. When love becomes overwhelming, the unconscious may respond by creating distance, not because the love isn't real, but because the self is unready to receive it fully. We may think the silence is about them, but perhaps it's also an invitation to pause, to stop chasing and start listening to our own unmet needs our own hidden fears. The fear of being abandoned, the fear of not being chosen, the fear that if someone leaves, we will lose something essential within us. But the truth is, no one completes us, and no one can take away the parts of us we haven't yet chosen to claim. Jung believed that individuation's journey of becoming whole requires turning inward, especially when the outer world becomes uncertain. So instead of asking, "How do I get them back?" ask, "What have I lost in myself trying to keep them close? What did I silence in my soul in order to be loved?" True healing begins when we stop making love a performance, when we stop measuring our worth by another's presence, and when we begin to return gently, patient little the self we left behind. Not all love stories are meant to last, but every love, especially the ones that stir us the most, leaves behind a lesson. Sometimes, the purpose of a connection is not to stay but to awaken, to guide us back to the mirror, to show us the parts of ourselves that long to be seen, accepted, and held by us. So if someone walks away, and the silence lingers, ask yourself, what is this emptiness trying to teach me? Because the greatest return is not always theirs, it is yours. Back to your truth, back to your center, back to the love that begins within. Because sometimes, what we learn in someone's absence is far more powerful than what we ever learned in their presence. 6. The healing hidden in absence. When someone we love disappears from our lives suddenly or slowly, it often feels like something has been taken from us, a connection lost, a future dissolved, and in that space, we are left with questions. What went wrong? Why did they leave? Wasn't the love real? In a culture that prizes clarity and closure, the absence of explanation feels cruel. We're taught to seek answers, to demand resolution. But not every departure is meant to be explained in words. Some absences are meant to awaken something deeper within us. Carl Jung believed that the people who enter our lives are not random. They often reflect back to us the very parts of ourselves we've buried or forgotten. And sometimes, their departure serves as a mirroring where we've placed our worth, our identity, or our healing in someone else's presence. When someone we love leaves without closure, the mind scrambles for reasons. But the unconscious speaks a different language. It stirs emotions we didn't know we were holding. It opens doors to past grief, childhood abandonment, and unmet needs we've carried for years. The person who left may have been a catalyst, not a destination. Their presence touched something sacred, something raw. And now, in their absence, we are called not to chase but to reflect, to ask, what has this loss stirred in me? What part of me believed I could not survive without them? This is where the real healing begins, not in fixing the relationship, but in reclaiming the self that got lost inside it, in understanding that we did not lose love you were shown where we still needed to love ourselves. Jung's concept of shadow reminds us that the emotions we reject or suppress don't disappear. They surface in moments of rupture. They come back in the silence after goodbye. But if we face them with awareness, they become teachers not enemies. So instead of asking, will they come back? Ask, what has this experience revealed about the parts of me I still need to tend to? What emptiness is being mirrored to me now? And how can I meet it with compassion, not fear? True growth is not about never losing someone. It's about learning who we become when we do. Do we abandon ourselves in the pain? Or do we begin to build something sturdier within? Sometimes, the absence of love from another leads us back to a presence within ourselves we had forgotten. And in that return, there is strength, there is peace, there is a new kind of loved one that does not depend on being held, but on finally learning how to hold ourselves. It's in that quiet space that we begin to understand why some run not from love, but from the depth of feeling it stirs. 7. The ones who run from love. It's one of the most confusing experiences to feel deeply loved by someone, only to watch them slowly drift away. They don't leave with anger or final words. They simply become distant, emotionally unavailable, even cold. And you're left wondering how something that felt so real could vanish so quietly. We're taught to see this as inconsistency, as if the person never meant what they said, or never truly felt what they showed. But sometimes, what looks like emotional withdrawal is actually the consequence of love reaching a depth that stirs something hidden. Carl Jung believed that the unconscious mind carries everything we've suppressed, every fear, every wound, every unmet need we never dared to face. And love, especially the kind that is real and present, has the power to shine a light on all of it. It doesn't just make us feel safe, it makes us feel seen. And for some, that visibility is terrifying. To be loved is to be mirrored, not just our strengths, but also our shadows. When someone loves us deeply, they reflect back our vulnerability, our fear of being abandoned, of not being enough, of losing ourselves. And if we're not ready to meet those parts within, the instinct to run becomes powerful. This is not always a conscious choice. It's often a defense mechanism rooted in early emotional conditioning. People who grew up feeling unseen, unsafe, or emotionally overwhelmed may develop a belief deep in the unconscious that love equals danger. That closeness leads to loss. That being known leads to pain. So when they find love that feels too real, too available, too close, they panic. They distance themselves not to hurt the other, but to protect the fragile self that doesn't yet know how to receive love without fear. We often respond by trying to prove our worth. We cling. We overgive. We hope that if we're patient enough, they'll return. But Jung reminded us, what we do not heal in ourselves, we recreate in others. And sometimes, chasing someone who is running is not love, it's a reflection of our own need to be chosen to feel whole. What if, instead of chasing, we paused? What if we asked, what does their fear awaken in me? Why do I feel I must be the one to fix what they cannot face? The truth is, not everyone who runs will return. And even if they do, the question isn't whether they come back. It's who they are when they don't, who we have become in their absence. Sometimes, love asks us not to hold on tighter, but to let go more gently. To meet our own need for love not with desperation, but with dignity. And to remember, those who run from love are not always running from us. And often, the moment love feels most real is the very moment it vanishes, not because it's untrue, but because it's too much. 8. When love disappears at its deepest point, there's a strange kind of silence that often comes just when love feels the most alive. A sudden pulling back, a withdrawal that makes no sense, especially when the connection felt deep, sincere, and real. It leaves behind a quiet ache, a sense of confusion that lingers like fog. We tend to interpret this silence as betrayal. We believe that if someone pulls away at the height of intimacy, they must have never truly cared. We assume that real love should grow steadily, uninterrupted. But what if love doesn't always follow a linear path? What if love, when it becomes too intense, awakens something that the other person is not ready to face? Carl Jung's work reminds us that the unconscious plays a powerful role in relationships. The deeper a bond goes, the more it touches not only our dreams, but also our fears. Love becomes a mirror reflecting not just the beauty of connection, but the buried wounds, the unfinished stories, the shadows we've tried to outrun. And for some, this reflection is overwhelming. Not because the love isn't real, but because it's too real. Because it invites them into a level of vulnerability they've never learned how to hold. When love reaches that depth, it can feel like standing at the edge of a cliff. Rather than stepping forward, some retreat not out of indifference, but out of fear. Fear of losing control, fear of being dependent, fear of being fully seen. These fears often don't surface as conscious thoughts. Instead, they show up as distancing, avoidance, or complete emotional shutdown. The one who's left behind is often stuck in the loop of what happened. But the real question isn't always about what you did. It's about what the relationship stirred in the other person's psyche, about the hidden parts of them that love has exposed and their readiness to face them. Jung believed that the moments that challenge us most are opportunities for transformation. When someone pulls away just as things get deep, it's not always a rejection. Sometimes, it's a breaking point between the self they've known and the self they're afraid to become. And that space, however painful, can also be a space for healing. So instead of seeing their silence as abandonment, what if we saw it as a mirror? What did this connection awaken in you? What part of you still seeks reassurance in another's presence? What fear of your own was mirrored back to you in their withdrawal? Not all love is meant to stay, but every love, especially the ones that vanish at their peak, has the power to reveal something essential. And in that revelation, there's a choice not to chase, not to shrink, but to return to yourself, with more awareness, with more grace, with the understanding that sometimes the love that disappears was never leaving you, it was inviting you home. Just like deep love, kindness too can become invisibly special when it's given without pause, without boundary, without being seen. 9. When kindness fades into the background, there's a quiet pain that comes when your kindness is taken for granted, when your steady love becomes invisible, when your care, once appreciated, is now expected and no longer seen. It happens subtly. You give, and they receive. At first, there's gratitude, then comfort, then assumption, and eventually, your presence becomes part of the background noise, unnoticed but necessary. And you begin to wonder, have I disappeared inside the very love I gave so freely? In modern relationships, we often celebrate intensity over consistency, big gestures over quiet presence, and those who love gently, those who offer patience, understanding, and emotional safety are too often overlooked. It's a painful misunderstanding that calm love is lesser love, that those who don't demand attention must not need to be held in return. But Carl Jung would argue otherwise. He believed that what we fail to value in others often reflects what we have yet to value in ourselves. The unconscious is drawn to what feels familiar, not necessarily what feels healthy. So for someone used to chaos, peace can feel empty. For someone used to proving their worth, unconditional love can feel unearned and even uncomfortable. And so, they may withdraw from you, not because they don't feel safe, but because they don't know how to exist in the safety you offer. They may stop noticing you, not because you've changed, but because their inner world is still wired for struggle, not serenity. This is the danger of being the strong one, the consistent one, the emotionally available one. You become the anchor everyone leans on but few think to ask how you're holding up. Over time, your kindness becomes mistaken for invulnerability. Your emotional steadiness is assumed to be infinite, and you may begin to feel unseen, even in the very relationship you've helped keep steady. Jung's idea of the shadow reminds us that what is unacknowledged does not disappear, it only goes underground. And when your emotional needs are consistently buried beneath service to others, resentment begins to grow in silence. You don't want to pull away, but you feel yourself fading, not from a lack of love, but from a lack of being loved back with equal presence. So ask yourself, what part of me believed I had to earn love by disappearing? What made me think that being good meant being silent about my needs? Why does my kindness feel like a burden instead of a bridge? Healing begins when you stop apologizing for needing to be seen, when you realize that being kind doesn't mean becoming invisible, and when you understand that true connection isn't built on one person giving endlessly, but on both people holding each other fully and consciously in return. And when our kindness is no longer honored, the most loving thing we can do may be to let go, not in bitterness, but in quiet strength. 10. Letting love be what it is. There's a quiet truth that many struggle to accept. Sometimes love doesn't stay, not because it wasn't real, not because someone did something wrong, but because love, like all living things, follows its own rhythm, and not all hearts are ready to grow at the same pace. We often believe that love must be held tightly, that we must fight for it, preserve it, protect it from slipping away. But this belief can lead us to confuse attachment with connection, control with commitment. We fear that letting go means giving up. But what if letting go is actually the most loving thing we can do? Carl Jung taught that what we cling to most desperately often reveals what we fear losing within ourselves. When we try to hold someone who is already drifting, we may not be protecting the relationship, may be protecting the illusion that we are only whole. When they are near, the unconscious mind, in its effort to avoid pain, pushes us to grasp, to chase, to fix. But love is not something to be fixed. It is something to be honored, even when it changes form. The person who walks away may never return, and that absence can feel like a wound. But Jung reminded us that every loss is also a mirror reflecting the parts of ourselves we've left unheld. The silence after love can become a space of profound healing, if we dare to listen to what it's asking us to see. Was our love based on presence or on fear of absence? Did we love them, or did we need them to complete something unfinished in us? These questions are not meant to shame. They are meant to awaken, because the true measure of love is not whether it stays, but whether it leads us closer to truth, especially the truth about ourselves. Sometimes love comes into our lives not to stay, to shift us, to bring forward a part of us that has long been waiting to be seen. And when that lesson is learned, the bond may dissolve not as a failure, but as a transition, as a release, as a returning to ourselves. So instead of asking, why didn't they stay? We might ask, what did this love awaken in me? What strength did it show me I already had? What did it invite me to remember about who I truly am, even when no one is standing beside me? Letting love be what it is means letting go of the need to define, to hold, to secure. It means honoring its depth without needing to possess it. Because if it's true, if it's aligned, and whole, it will return. And if it doesn't, it was still real enough to leave us changed. In that change, we are not broken. We are becoming. Because in the end, love is not about clinging, it's about becoming. And sometimes, the deepest love is the one that brings us home to ourselves. The love that leads us home. Sometimes, what feels like the end of love is only the beginning of deeper awareness, a moment of silence, a distance we didn't choose, and yet, it opens a doorway we never thought we'd need to walk through. We often misunderstand emotional withdrawal as rejection, but Carl Jung reminds us what we do not make conscious will control us from the shadows. When someone pulls away, it may be their unconscious trying to protect them from love that feels too vulnerable, too exposing. It's not always about us, and yet it affects us deeply. In these moments, we stand at a crossroads. Do we chase, or do we pause and listen? The pain of absence reveals more than the presence ever could. It reflects our inner terrain, the places we still seek validation, the fears we've yet to face, the love we withhold from ourselves. And in that reflection, we meet ourselves more honestly than before. Jung taught that relationships mirror the self. The person who distances may awaken in us what we've avoided seeing. But this isn't a punishment. It's a path that invites us to hold space for ourselves, to accept that not all love stays, but every love has the power to show us where we are still becoming. So if someone leaves, don't close your heart within it. Let their absence turn into insight. Let it teach you the strength of your own presence. And above all, remember, the love that lasts is the one we learn to give inward first.